I never planned to reveal my true identity to my family. For 3 years, I worked as a housekeeper at the Richardson Grand Hotel, our family's pride and joy, while secretly being the CEO of Lux Global Hotels, the third largest hotel chain in the world. But family has a way of pushing you past your limits, especially when they think you're beneath them. My name is Grace Chen, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the best way to teach humility is to let people reveal their own arrogance. The Richardson Grand had been in our family for 2 generations. My uncle, Thomas, inherited it from my grandfather, turning it from a modest local establishment into a respectable regional hotel. But it was struggling in today's market, falling behind modern hospitality trends and accumulating debt that my uncle refused to acknowledge. I remember the day I made the decision to work there. I had just finished a meeting with my executive team at Lux Global, discussing potential acquisitions in the Northeast region. The Richardson Grand's name came up on our target list, and I felt my heart skip a beat. The Richardson family seemed resistant to selling, my CFO reported. They're drowning in debt but won't admit it. 6 months, maybe a year before they're forced to sell at a fraction of their current value. I couldn't let that happen, not to my family's legacy. Even if they had no idea who I really was. Even if they thought I was just the quiet niece who never amounted to much. So I did what any secret CEO would do. I applied for a job as a housekeeper. Why would you want to work here? HR had asked, puzzled by my application. Your degree is from Cornell's hotel school. I believe in starting from the ground up, I replied, knowing they wouldn't understand the full truth of those words. For 3 years, I watched and learned. I cleaned rooms, changed sheets, and quietly observed everything that was wrong with the hotel's operations, all while running my own billion-dollar company remotely during my breaks and after hours. My cousin Bradley, Uncle Thomas's son and the hotel's current manager, never missed an opportunity to remind me of my position. Grace, the bathroom in 306 needs attention, he called across the lobby, making sure guests could hear him ordering around his own cousin. Try not to take all day this time. I did every task perfectly, gathering information that would later prove invaluable. Every leaking pipe, every outdated system, every guest complaint, I documented it all. Not that anyone noticed. They were too busy looking down their noses at the quiet housekeeper who kept to herself. That all changed last Tuesday at the monthly family business meeting. I usually wasn't invited, but this time, Bradley had a special reason for wanting me there. The family gathered in the hotel's grand conference room, all mahogany panels and crystal chandeliers that had seen better days. Uncle Thomas sat at the head of the table, his wife Margaret beside him. Bradley stood at the front, practically bouncing with excitement as he prepared to make his announcement. As you all know, he began, straightening his designer tie, the hotel industry is evolving. We need to modernize to compete with the big chains. He clicked to the next slide in his presentation. That's why I've developed a comprehensive rebranding strategy. I nearly choked on my water. The strategy he was presenting was an almost exact copy of a successful initiative I had implemented at Lux Global 2 years ago. He must have found it in some industry publication and claimed it as his own. We'll need to terminate some of our less essential staff, Bradley continued, his eyes finding mine with a smirk. Starting with outdated positions like full-time housekeepers. We'll outsource to a cleaning service instead. The room fell silent. Everyone knew he was talking about me now. Bradley, Aunt Margaret said with false concern, Grace is family. Perhaps we could find her another position in the laundry? I sat quietly, watching my cousin's plan unfold. 3 years of his subtle jabs and not-so-subtle humiliation had led to this moment. He wanted to fire me in front of the entire family to prove once and for all that he was the successful one, the worthy heir to the Richardson Grand. Actually, Bradley said, puffing up with self-importance, I've already arranged everything. The new cleaning service starts next week. He turned to me with a thin smile. Grace, consider this your official notice. We need your uniform returned by Friday. I could have revealed everything right then. Could have pulled out my phone and shown them the Lux Global company profile with my picture and CEO title. Could have mentioned that my breaks were actually spent running a company with over 200 hotels worldwide. Instead, I stood up slowly, smoothed my housekeeper's uniform, and smiled. Of course, Bradley. I understand completely. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and congratulations. The rebranding strategy, it worked wonderfully when Lux Global implemented it 2 years ago. I left them wondering how a housekeeper knew that detail, walking away to the sound of Bradley's spluttering excuses about his original plan. What they didn't know was that in my 3 years of cleaning rooms and observing operations, I had compiled a comprehensive analysis of everything wrong with the Richardson Grand. Every violation of health codes, every shortcut in maintenance, every instance of Bradley fudging the books to hide his expensive mistakes. And tomorrow, the CEO of Lux Global Hotels had a scheduled inspection of the property. They just didn't know that the CEO was me. I spent that evening in my small apartment above the local coffee shop, finalizing the details of what would happen next. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from family members, some expressing concern about my firing, others warning me not to make a scene. I ignored them all. Instead, I opened my laptop and began typing an email to my executive team at Lux Global. Proceed with Operation Richardson tomorrow as planned, and make sure Bradley's there for the entire inspection. It's time you learned what real hotel management looks like. As I clicked send, I couldn't help but smile, thinking about tomorrow. Bradley always said I needed to learn my place in the hotel business. He was about to find out exactly what that place was. The next morning, I arrived at the Richardson Grand exactly at 9 a.m., but not in my usual housekeeper uniform. Instead, I wore a tailored charcoal suit from my other life, my CEO wardrobe that had been hanging unused in my apartment for 3 years. My heels clicked against the marble lobby floor as I walked in, turning heads of guests and staff alike. "Excuse me, miss?" Bradley's voice called out from behind the front desk. "Can I help you?" His voice trailed off as I turned around. "Grace? Why are you dressed like that?" "Good morning, Bradley," I said calmly. "I believe you're expecting the CEO of Lux Global Hotels today." His face contorted in confusion. "Yes, but you need to leave. We have an important inspection today, and I can't have you causing a scene about your termination." The elevator dinged, and my executive team stepped out: Thomas Wright, my CFO, Sarah Martinez, our head of operations, and Michael Chong, our chief legal officer. All people who had been running Lux Global with me via video calls and late-night meetings for the past 3 years. "Mrs. Chen," Thomas said, walking over with a professional nod, "the preliminary reports you requested are ready for review." Bradley's face went pale. "Mrs. Chen? What's going on here?" "Perhaps we should move this discussion to the conference room," I suggested. "And Bradley, please call Uncle Thomas and Aunt Margaret. They'll want to be here for this." 30 minutes later, my family sat in the same conference room where they'd fired me the day before. But the power dynamic had shifted dramatically. My executive team lined one side of the table, while the Richardson family sat opposite, looking like they'd seen a ghost. "Let me make this clear," I began, standing at the head of the table, where Uncle Thomas usually sat. "For the past 3 years, while working as a housekeeper here, I've also been serving as the CEO of Lux Global Hotels. Every break I took wasn't spent slacking off, as Bradley often claimed, but running a company with over 200 properties worldwide." "That's impossible," Aunt Margaret whispered. "You're just a maid." I finished for her. "That's exactly why this worked so perfectly. You were also convinced of my insignificance that none of you ever bothered to Google my name or question why a Cornell graduate would choose to work as a housekeeper." I opened my laptop and projected a series of documents onto the screen. "During my time here, I've documented every violation of health codes, every instance of deferred maintenance, and every questionable accounting practice." I glanced at Bradley, who suddenly found the table very interesting. "Including the $500,000 renovation budget that actually went to covering gambling debts." Uncle Thomas's head snapped toward his son. Bradley, is this true? I can explain, Bradley began, but I cut him off. Before he could spin another lie, the Richardson Grand is 3 months away from bankruptcy. Your reputation in the industry is deteriorating, and your staff turnover rate is nearly 80% annually. In short, this hotel is failing. The room fell silent. 3 years of hard truth sped by in one moment. Why? Uncle Thomas finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why work as a housekeeper if you're really who you say you are? I sat down, softening my tone. Because this hotel is our family's legacy. Grandfather built it from nothing. I couldn't bear to see it fail. I needed to understand exactly what was wrong before I could help fix it. Fix it? Bradley scoffed, finding his voice again. We don't need your help. And I still don't believe you're really. Sarah slid a folder across the table. Mrs. Chen's credentials, press coverage, and company documentation. Feel free to verify everything. As my family flipped through the papers, their faces cycling through disbelief, shock, and finally understanding, I laid out their options. Lux Global is prepared to make an offer to purchase the Richardson Grand. A very generous offer, considering its current financial state. We maintain the family name and history but bring it up to modern standards. Or? Uncle Thomas asked. Or I walk away, both as a housekeeper and as a potential buyer. But I should warn you, the next company that offers to buy this hotel won't care about preserving your legacy. They'll knock it down and build something new. Aunt Margaret, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. All those times we looked down on you, treated you like you were beneath us. You could have said something. Would you have believed me? I asked quietly. Or would you have dismissed it as the desperate lies of just a maid? The silence that followed was answer enough. I'll give you 24 hours to decide. If you accept our offer, the Richardson Grand will become the flagship property of our new Classic Hotels division. If not, I shrugged. I hear the property developers are offering a fair price for the land. As I turned to leave, Bradley's voice stopped me. Wait. The rebranding strategy one presented yesterday, it was a copy of my initiative from 2 years ago. Yes, I know. Next time you decide to plagiarize someone's work, Bradley, make sure they're not in the room. The next 24 hours were tense. My phone remained silent as my family processed everything they'd learned. I spent the time in my small apartment, finally able to work openly on my laptop without hiding my CEO identity. At exactly 9 a.m. the next morning, Uncle Thomas called. We accept, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. But Grace, I need to know, can you forgive us? I thought about all the times they dismissed me, looked down on me, treated me as less than family. But I also thought about my grandfather, who taught me that true leadership isn't about revenge, it's about making things better. I'm not interested in forgiveness, Uncle Thomas, I said. I'm interested in making the Richardson Grand great again. Are you ready to help me do that? The transformation of the hotel took 6 months. Bradley was reassigned to our property in Miami, starting as an assistant manager where he could learn the business properly. Uncle Thomas retired but stayed on as a consultant, his decades of experience finally being put to good use without the stress of running the whole operation. The Richardson Grand became our most successful classic property. A perfect blend of historic charm and modern efficiency. The staff turnover rate dropped to 15%, and our guest satisfaction scores soared. 1 year after the revelation, I stood in the newly renovated lobby, watching guests check in at the gleaming front desk. The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, restored to their former glory. A new plaque hung on the wall, telling the story of how my grandfather started the hotel with nothing but a dream and determination. Aunt Margaret appeared beside me, looking around with pride. You know, Grace, I think I finally understand why you did it this way. Oh? I turned to her, curious. You could have bought the hotel outright 3 years ago. Could have forced us out. Instead, you chose to understand it from the ground up, to learn every detail, every problem, every possibility for improvement. I smiled. The best leaders don't just give orders, Aunt Margaret. They understand every aspect of their business, from changing sheets to managing millions. Your grandfather would be proud, she said softly. Not just of saving the hotel, but of how you did it. As I watched another happy family check in, I thought about everything that had happened. The 3 years of being underestimated, of cleaning rooms while running a global company, of biting my tongue through countless family meetings. Had it been worth it? The hotel's new rating had just come in that morning, 5 stars, the highest possible score. Our occupancy rate was at 95%, and we had a waiting list for premium rooms. The staff moved through the lobby with pride and purpose, each one properly trained and fairly compensated. But more importantly, my family had learned valuable lessons about humility, respect, and true leadership. Bradley was actually doing well in Miami, having finally understood that success comes from hard work and integrity, not arrogance and shortcuts. Yes, it had been worth it. I straightened my suit jacket and headed to my office, the same room where Bradley had once summoned me to clean bathrooms. Now, it was command central for both the Richardson Grand and my ongoing duties as CEO of Lux Global. On my desk sat a framed photo of my grandfather standing proudly in front of his newly opened hotel. Next to it was my old housekeeper's uniform, preserved in a shadow box with a small plaque that read, "Never forget where you started." And I never would. Because sometimes, the best way to lead isn't from above, but from within. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one you should watch most carefully. And sometimes, just sometimes, the maid turning down your bed is actually the CEO making sure everything is perfect. As for me, I still occasionally put on a housekeeper's uniform and spend a day working alongside our staff. It keeps me grounded, keeps me connected to what matters most in this business, the small details that make a hotel feel like home. After all, you never know who might be watching, learning, and waiting for the right moment to reveal their true worth.